I think we're good. All right, guys, welcome back. Whoever's in here listening to us, we're just gonna talk some shit about this whole Elon situation with the lawsuit and Twitter. Honestly, it's so funny, right? Because Sean, like we were talking about this for some time ago. We're like, I don't know if it's gonna happen. I thought it would happen, but I was kind of always on the fence where I was like, okay, he might do his own thing depending on the deal or whatever. But yeah, man, this thing's like a whole fiasco. What are your thoughts on this whole thing?
So I've talked to a couple of people who work in corporate law and specifically Delaware law,
Yeah,
and I'll give you a diatribe of this in a second. But they're basically like, yeah, this is pretty much unprecedented. I mean, the reason there's a contract is because the contract has terms. So people are saying things like, yeah, he's going to get out of it. It's like, but they already built in a breakup clause of $1 billion in this thing. So like,
right,
yeah,
right.
you can get out of it. It's going to cost them $1 billion. And then, of course, everyone's an expert. I actually took I hold a certification in contract law. I don't ever talk about that actually, but like I do. And
Well,
um,
yes.
yeah, and I'm not an expert, but like
Your email's gonna blow up now.
yeah, no, it's not going to blow. And I'll tell you, like the problem is this is fairly cut and dry, and it's also unprecedented. I hate that word, by the way, but not unprecedented that things like this don't happen, but that like it's so publicly talked about in the open space. So the issue that Elon's going to have is he's been putting all this stuff out there public. The courts
Yeah,
can pull everything they want. Twitter, all Twitter is really going to have to say is like, you know, how do you come up with your own way of debating what we're saying? And everyone's talking about like the bots and the bots and the bots and the bots. It's not that I think they're wrong. It's just that I don't know that there's specific relief in the contract for that based on a breakup clause. And there's going to be terms in there that get discussed like crazy. I'm going to read you guys something in a second, but Drew, I want to get your take on what you think about this as well before I do it.
Yeah, I think I was hearing some stuff. It's like it has to be like 50%, like a big substantial change for it to even like be able to break up. And so, I mean, I think they're gonna have to meet somewhere in the middle and settle. But I don't know. It doesn't make sense to buy Twitter. I wouldn't buy Twitter if I had a couple $1 billion lying
I would
around.
definitely not buy it for the rate that that he presented. What 3 4 months ago was right? That's just stupidity.
No.
I think the problem is like I'm sure we can probably all agree the value of Twitter is not the value of Twitter is not the tweeting. The value of Twitter is the data. So the question is,
Yeah,
what would you want to pay to have access and usable and the ability to use all of that data? That's the part
Yeah.
that I think is going to be really difficult for anyone to do here. But I want to read something to you guys. It's a little bit long, so I'll talk fast like I always do. But um, I think this is worth calling out. I've read this. There's been several publications, but just to give credit where it's due, I'm actually reading the Times of India for this specific article. I read all of my stuff from overseas reports just because, as a general rule, I don't want to just have a U.S. only vision or North American only. So, lawyers for Twitter of San Francisco said in their lawsuit that they will need only 4 days in court to show that Musk should be forced to honor his agreement and pay $54.20 a share. If they prevail and the court enters a judgment holding Musk liable, it could invoke Delaware's civil contempt laws if he doesn't pay up, says Brian Quinn, a Boston law professor, teaches this. A judge could hold him in contempt and set a daily fine until he complies. For Musk, that would have to be a very large number, of course,
yeah,
at
yeah.
$200 billion. So that's what former Chancery Judge Andre Bouchard did in a case involving the court-ordered sale of transcription software maker TransPerfect Global. When TransPerfect officials ignored the order, Bouchard imposed a $30,000 daily fine, and the company quickly complied. Now, of course, that's not enough for Elon, but I want to finish this just because I think there's a point I want to call out here. The court could let Twitter go after Musk's assets as well. So Chancery Court is a court of equity with broad power to fashion remedies. Tesla's a Delaware corporation, so it falls under Delaware law, okay? And I'm going to tell you why. I want to tell you guys and anyone who watches this why that's so important to understand why this is not the same as a regular lawsuit. They've also cautioned this is nothing like anything that's ever happened before, a scenario where someone is ordered to close a deal and would just ignore it. So the reality here is no one really thinks that if it's ordered, it's not going to happen because there could be some serious things that happen to Musk if that is the case.
Right,
Now,
right.
all that being said, like this is everything from fines to jail time, and everyone can get extreme on this. Here's the key, though, that has to be understood of why this is so serious. Delaware is in the business of corporate law. You don't have. There's no other reason to go to Delaware. No offense to people in Delaware. Delaware's a nice place, but like Delaware's
Dover's a great place.
Yeah, it's just for corporate law basically. So they've got corporate law for a reason. It's on the books. It's tenured. It's secure. It's predictable. The judges understand it. The chanceries understand it. And the reason you open up your corporations in Delaware is because it's open and transparent rules and regulations. The reason this is such a big issue. The reason this is a particularly big deal is Delaware can't like just be in favor of Elon because he's a popular guy. If Delaware loses the Delaware nature, it's no longer a place to have corporate law.
Right,
so
right,
they have
true.
to abide by contracts. So the fact that Twitter is saying they need 4 days to win this, I'm going to be honest with you. I think mistakes might have been made here, but like that's a pretty serious statement to make unless you feel like you've got something extremely solid. And I would also call out too that like all the stuff Musk has put out there publicly is not going to help him when it comes to court and shows he's.
Oh, you think so?
Oh, dude! I mean, no corporate judge wants people to just openly discussing who's going to get laid off. They don't like the way things are. They don't want
right.
Like,
yeah,
that's a bad sign. And I think Twitter could also possibly talk about damages to reputation, to its staff, to its revenue. So there's a lot that could happen here. I'm not saying I know what's going to happen because I don't know what's going to happen, but I do think that like I don't know. I mean, we're talking pretty crazy stuff here. Like we're talking potentially this guy having to spend $54.20 per share in a company that's now worth nothing, basically. It was worth probably nothing at the time, anyways. So I don't know. That's where I'm kind of like, geez, I don't know what's going to happen here. The reality is, for what it's worth, this is going to be one of those things where it's going to get tons of press, tons of talk time. All the YouTube channels are going to be talking about it, but no one's going to be talking about the pure reality.
Yeah.
Was there a contract? Yes or no? What were the terms of the contract? Were they followed? Yes or no? And then it's up to the Delaware courts to decide if everything fell within it.
Yeah, but don't half these things get repealed? I mean, you could, like, for example, the whole 4-day clause, like, can't they just, like, like they do it all the time, right? I don't know about this particular branch of law, whatever, but in other cases, they'll say, oh, you have a deposition at this time, and then they'll just sort of defer, and move it further on. Is that not a possibility here, or is there, like, a binding thing here?
You're talking about corporate contracts tied to a corporate court, tied to a chancery in Delaware. I think it's not quite like a public court or small claims or whatever,
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. I don't know, man. I mean, here's the thing. Like, Sean, I think we talked about this. We're probably the only people, like, actually on YouTube that actually said this shit, which is, like, sometimes Elon makes dumb mistakes, especially like not, I don't know about this whole thing being a mistake. I actually thought it was going to go through at some point, but like I think it's a good idea that he's trying to buy some sort of thing like this. Like, let's get that straight. My issue was, like, I don't understand why, Elon feels the need to poke the fucking bear like every second he gets. It's like, I get it. It's really annoying, but there's a certain finesse to some of these things. And I'm not saying he needs to be this typical CEO type character. I get it. All I'm saying is, like, there's a certain class you'd have to be able to actually get the deal done. And if he is actually thinking first principles, and look, like, I'm a big Elon fan and all that stuff, that's fine. But what I'm saying is, if he's actually thinking first principles, and I do the same thing with Alex Karp, right? I criticize the same people. It's like, I can't just be blinded to this shit. If you're really thinking about first principles and getting stuff done in an efficient manner, why in God's name would you go and say dumb shit and then have it backfire in a case where you do have this clause where you have to cough up the money or whatever the case is? No matter what kind of legal team you have, I mean, they're going to look at you and kind of shake their head a little bit, right?
Let me say something first, though. Could you explain for anyone who doesn't know what that means?
Which one? The first principles?
Yeah, first principles. I know what first principles are, but my guess is a lot of people probably don't.
No, yeah, first principles is just like you're taking the shortest path to the end result. So, like, for example, if you need to make a wheel, right, you're gonna make sure that every component of that wheel takes. There's different concepts. Like, you could say a two-step approach. Like, okay, so if you're going to get materials, make sure it only takes like as few jumps as possible for it to get to the end result. So a classic example would be like designing your kitchen, for instance, right? So if you're trying to make a sandwich, you don't want your bread to be on the other side of the kitchen and your butter to be on the other side of the kitchen, or your meat. You want things to be in that sort of same vicinity so that you're able to make the product faster. You're able to get like the transport time is less. Everything is much lower, so that like when you actually put the materials into it, it's shorter. It's a shorter time, I guess, to final product, time to final product, whatever that metric might be. So that's one of the concepts of first principles, and I think that's one that Tesla tries to employ as best as possible. Because like, he talks about all the time, right? Oh, we want raw materials on one end and end product on the other end, but it's not just raw materials; it's also how it gets there. Like he wants to shorten that span. So wherever he makes these factories, he wants the materials to come from there, whatever the case is, which is actually one of the reasons why probably the India factory might not work, but that's another topic, but it is what it is. So in a way, that's sort of first principles. Now there's other things, like there's also a physics component to this and stuff like that. But when we're talking about first principles thinking, you're trying to take the shortest approach, almost like a Dijkstra, like the shortest approach to get to that final result, whatever it may be. And coincidentally, it just happens to be the most efficient if you're talking about the official term of efficiency here, right?
That's it. It's just getting down to the most simple truth of the matter of what you're trying to accomplish. And I think that this is important because in much of Elon's business, he operates from a first principle perspective. In fact, if we're being honest, if you think about SpaceX as a perfect example of first principles, we're like, well, why is it so hard to go to the moon? Well, I need rockets and I can't work with NASA and I can't do this and they won't re-land. Then I have to rebuild the engines and it takes too much gas and it's too hard to fly and the engineering is impossible and physics are impossible. And you're like, what if those things were possible? What would it take to fly? Well, I guess I would just need to raise some capital and build a rocket ship that could land and be used more than once. That's your first principle, right? Yep. And everything else gets stacked on top. So it's like, well, by solving that, you solved everything in line. And it is funny though, because like Elon is becoming, oh boy, you want to talk about making people mad? Wait till you hear this. Elon is becoming like Trump.
Oh, you think so? Well, did they have this beef? Did they beef together like Trump released something?
Wow, I saw that was so unhinged. I don't even know what to say. like whether you like hated Trump and think he should be in jail, or you love him and think he should be the president. The reality is someone needed to take this guy's Twitter away from him and be like, one per day, and we're going to edit it first. Because more than likely, I think he probably would still have been the president if it wasn't for the tweets, like constantly getting himself in trouble with this stuff. And Elon, to your point, Shabari, is the same exact thing where it's like, why are you saying these things? Like, like you don't need to say everything.
Exactly, yeah. Like, and the worst part about it is, again, I'm going to go back to the first principles things because he keeps like first principles and order of magnitude has permeated all the Elon fans and stuff. They say it for everything now, right? Like the base idea, if you're talking scientifically about the whole first principles thing, is that you cannot deduce it any further. So why in the fuck would you start adding complexity to this matter, especially, for example, if you have a thinking aspect, right? Why would you start adding these levels of complexity? I think that's what you're talking about, Sean, but I don't know, man. Sorry, it's just getting me pissed off.
No, you're right. You're right. Drew, I'd be curious to get a take from like, we all work in three very different kinds of environments, right?
Yeah, we do.
Ours in the IT side of the house. I'm in the front end, sort of sales and consulting side of the world. You're like, hands in the weeds, managing a shop. Like, what are you hearing? Like, are people talking about Elon at work, or is this like no one even gives a shit?
I think anything I hear something every once in a while. I think one of the managers under me was like, "Yeah, you hear about that Elon stuff buying Twitter?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's nuts, it's crazy." But normally people don't talk about it. I think, And then sometimes it's like down the line, and it's not like exactly perfect.
Yeah.
I guess it's like telephone, but.
I'm actually super relieved you gave that answer because after I asked, I was like, wait, my thesis isn't going to work if he says the wrong thing here. my general thesis to like all of the stuff we're talking about is that basically no one in the real world gives a shit or even knows what's going on.
Yeah.
If you're not following it on Twitter, you're probably not following it at all. And even more so, Drew, you literally nailed it. Thank God. That wasn't a prepped question. Like when people do tell me about like what's going on, it is with completely inaccurate information, the wrong details. And just because people aren't trained in corporate law, they don't understand. All they see is like, oh yeah, well, Elon wants to buy Twitter to make sure Republicans win, or like, well, Twitter is run by people who don't have brains, so that's why they need to have Twitter. And it's like, it's none of those things. It's really just a silly. There's so much more that goes on behind the scenes that people don't see, and I think this idea of okay, I'm a big fan of the show Billions, although I hate that Axe is off the show, but like I love the show Billions. And one of the things they constantly talk about is this idea of like 4D chess. Not
Right.
just how big, not just that you're playing multiple levels, but the size of the board is bigger. I think the average person out there, and this is not like some like hidden insult. I'm included in this statement. The average person lives within a pretty small sphere, right?
Yep.
It's their friends, their family, their work, the area around them. They go to their vacation spots, and that's their version of like seeing another place.
Right.
So you can feel like you've got a full picture of reality, but the truth is that picture of reality might be really in a tunnel. Like it's tunnel vision, but you don't realize you're in a tunnel.
It's more localized. No, for sure.
Very localized. It's very localized. And the problem is when you're talking about like these battles between politicians and billionaires and the big corporations and social media, it's so hard to look at it from the perspective of the global aspect of the things that are happening. I'll give you a real. I'm going to go way off track here for a second, but I think it's important to talk about it. When we talk about this idea of like nationalism or localization,
Right.
or borders, or sending 40 billion to Ukraine, or whatever the case is, there's so many things that people don't understand. Like I don't want to have a whole conversation on this topic because I know it's gonna. I don't want to like talk about something I don't feel confident that I know all the details, but with what's happening in Sri Lanka is a perfect example of like a total government collapse based on what they're saying is the wokenization of the government, shutting down the ability to bring in fertilizer to grow their own crops, which means more reliance on outside sources, which means down farmers.
Did you get that from All In Pod?
Huh?
Did you listen to that from All In Pod?
No, but I do like the All In Pod.
They talked about it. They talked about it and talked about how ESG is fucking them.
Okay, so yes, agreed. And the problem with ESG is that they're not coming up with this on their own. They're probably, I don't know the numbers, but Sri Lanka is pretty high up as far as like the ESG stuff. I don't know what
like 98% ESG.
98%, I assume, must be like basically the top.
Well, they turned on the dime. The problem is they turned really fast. Like there's that some parts of the world are pretty good at certain things. The thing is, like, Asia has a very high like proficiency in terms of like getting into school and stuff like that. So people are generally aware of like, doing the right thing and all this other stuff. The problem is there's a lot of corruption, right? So like, I think what happened, and I did hear this on the All In Pod, but really this was an ongoing thing. This isn't something new. But they turned on a dime and they basically like torched half their, the farmers and stuff. And they were like, okay, well, what the hell are we going to do now? Because you got to understand the farmers, and it might be like this in a lot of places too. But the farming and the working class there are not that literate. Like they're not exact. They're workers. They know what they do and they do that only. They don't want to waste money doing anything else, right? So if you go and say, okay, use this instead, for them, they're like, well, I've been doing this for like how many ever years? Okay, fine, let's do this because it's government mandated. And then all of a sudden shit dies. So it's like, obviously there's bigger problems. I'm dumbing it down here a little bit. But, like this actually brings up a bigger point, Sean. And the thing is, like, Firstly, I know you're like, oh, I don't know if I want to talk about something I don't know much of. To be honest, man, no one knows shit. Okay, like it's funny. I think I remember talking to you privately, but like I was talking when this whole Ukraine situation came out. I was like, oh, maybe I should. Like, I'm researching it. I'm trying to learn more. I have a lot of Ukrainian friends. I'm asking around. I'm like, maybe I should do a video, just kind of like asking for information to do it. And people are like, no, man, don't do it. You don't know anything about it. Now we're gonna line up watching all these like random YouTubers making videos on Sri Lanka. So it is what it is. This is just her opinion. So let's get that straight. Firstly, secondly, the thing is, like, this whole part of the world, I think it's still technically the third world, or what do they call it now? Developing economies or whatever, right? Yeah. So like in a way, the sort of like spotlight is not really placed on them. So whenever this kind of stuff happens, everyone starts to like look at it immediately. Even Ukraine, people are aware of it to a certain degree before any of this kind of stuff happened, right? So with Sri Lanka, they're like, whoa, I bet you half the people don't even know where it is on the map, right? So it's one of those things where I think people are going to start learning to be aware of it. Yeah. And this, I think, shows signs of how globalized our economy really was. And I don't think it's going to have a big impact on what's going to happen here. But the reality of the situation is it is something that, like, it's showing cracks. I think it is.
So I disagree with you. I think understanding what happens in Sri Lanka is chess.
Yeah.
The 4D global chess is understanding that, like, Sri Lanka will now require a hero. And a hero is only one of maybe 5 global nations, right?
Oh, okay.
China or Russia.
China, Russia, or the U.S.
Yeah, but China's already like super fucking Sri Lanka for the most part, right? Like in a way, they're actually kind of.
I don't think it's going to matter now, man, because those people who have no food and no money are going to welcome that help.
True.
So now you have to start looking at like the global aspect of what's happening, right? If If China steps in to help another country who's struggling and needs help, they're beholden. They're now, what's the word? They're now obligated.
Yeah.
Obligated to China, right? It's not a loan, it's an obligation. It's not a favor, it's an obligation. And so then we say, like, why the hell are we spending $40 billion in Ukraine? We're not. We're sending $40 billion for the defense of Eastern energy to help our allies in the EU that can in turn help us with our inflation and economy when we need it. And then you've got Russia who's like, well, I have to also support areas of the world where China and America aren't. This might be Africa. This could be South America, whatever, right? It could be anywhere.
Yeah.
But the problem is like a lot of folks just don't understand how all these different things connect. Like there's this feeling of like, oh yeah, some place called Sri Lanka. I mean, you are right. I doubt anyone knows where it is. I mean, not anyone, but a lot of people probably don't.
I don't know where it is.
Well, like again, like it's a tiny little island, right? And it feels like just another news story, and it's going to be gone in 2 or 3 days. And dude, I'll tell you what. This is a quick side note. Then, because I think the inflation and housing we should talk about for a minute. But like going back to, I forget the timeline. It could have been, oh god, I lost a ton of money. Maybe 2013 or 14. I was heavily invested in the lira for a carry trade opportunity.
Okay.
Insane returns. I'll spare you guys all the details, but like I was very heavily invested in the lira. And then all of a sudden, I see a tank rolling down Main Street.
I remember you telling me this. Yeah.
Like, oh my god! And then next thing you know, we find out that like he brings in his brother-in-law to run the finances, and then they change the interest rates, and then the shit hits the fan, and now here we are today, still not good. And this is the problem: is like the average person that will watch this or any other thing on YouTube or anywhere else is getting their news from Twitter or from like CNBC or from Fox or CNN, right? And what they don't realize is like they're still in a tiny sphere. It's just you're just like I'm in the right lane, you're in the left lane, but we're still going in the same ultimately. And like the reality is like I watch I've told you this guys before, like I primarily operate on the Asian markets. So I'm at night, I'm seeing what happens overnight. I track that back to the US. So I've just gotten in a good habit of like really doing it. In fact, anyone who watches, if anyone watches this, I hope someone does. If anyone does watch this, I would really encourage and urge you to put on Bloomberg between like 10 p.m. and midnight, and you'll get a taste of what's most important to understand literally on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
And the reason that's so important is it is a total and utter shift of understanding, because we look at everything from the standpoint of like a democratic Western approach. They look at things as struggling democracies, small countries with smaller populations, and then massive communist country. So like what happens, how it happens, the way things are done, your perspective and your ability to be a good investor will transcend. And I could literally spend 8 hours talking about macroeconomic tie-ins between, you know, the BRICS and the West, and all this. I won't do it on this call, but like for sure, like that is really where the opportunities are right now, is understanding how commodities and currencies prop up companies, and those companies prop up the economies.
Yeah.
That said, because it's literally on the corner of my screen, 9.1%. Guys, what's up with the 9.1%? What's that about?
I don't know, man. I think it's funny because Drew and I both. Sorry, Drew, I'll let you chime in a second. But I remember when Drew and I took the call, like, what was it, a month ago or a month and a half ago? And I was like, yeah, I don't know, July's going to be a shit month. And you were saying something similar, but from another angle with the housing approach. But it's like we were both right, man. So it's like, I don't know. I feel like, to be honest, though, I feel like we're approaching sort of the top of this thing, maybe like one more month of this kind of stuff. And I think we're going to start going down. But Drew, sorry, I'll let you chime in, man.
Yeah, I was listening to a Twitter Spaces actually talking about it. They were like, yeah, there's just no way. I think there's more upside to run up, because the housing accounts for 30%, and it's not even accurately, judged. And so it's like, where is inflation? No one knows. And it's like, it could be way higher. So
true.
At this point, are they going to raise it $1 or like a whole percent? Like they almost have to.
Well, the Bank of Canada did it up here.
Still going up, so people are still buying houses.
Yeah, there's a whole shitstorm happening up here because the Bank of Canada went ahead and they're like, screw it, we're just going to full percent. And now there's like, I'm getting mail. I literally have a note. Oh shit, I should have brought it. But I have a note in the mail with like a handwritten note saying, I'll buy your house right now. And like this is literally frenzy. So yeah.
Jesus, that's insane. I will tell you, like, for a fact, I get probably easily 10 phone calls a day, 15 text messages a day to buy my properties down in Tennessee. Cash money. They're offering garbage prices, but like,
Yeah.
I'm waiting for the right number, and I'm like, yeah, you can have it then at that price. But I think what you said, Drew, a second ago was really good. Was like, is this really even the number? Or is this just sort of like what we're throwing a dart at and hitting? Because I mean,
I think everyone's saying it's bullcrap.
It's both. Well, and the question then becomes like, how are they massaging and weighting the data to make sure that that's the actual number?
Wait, so Drew, do you think it's higher, Drew, or do you think it's like lower?
I'm thinking it's higher because like
Yeah.
these rents have gone up. Like it's expensive. I know one of my coworkers was trying to find a place because he had to move out because his house was being bought that he was
Right.
renting, and like he was like, I can't find anywhere that's cheap. And then you have to look at like subsidized housing. And you have to jump through a bunch of hoops to even get through that.
Drew, what's he looking at for a monthly rent?
I think it's like 700 or 800.
So great.
Probably 1,000.
So we just saw a report this morning that the average monthly rent in Manhattan, average rent, is now $5,000 a month.
That's ridiculous.
$60,000 a year to live in a
ridiculous.
dump. To live in a dump. For what purpose, right? I mean, and the worst part is you start thinking about that and you're like, that's $60K net. That means you've got to be making about $80K, give or take.
Yeah.
You need to be making $80K to only pay your rent and nothing else.
Yeah.
You start thinking about numbers like that, that's when you're like, whoa, this is not done yet. We are in real trouble here. But on that note of rent and whatnot, I think that you're right, though. Like, the issue is some things haven't been inflated much because they've already gone through it previously. So
Right.
those slowdowns are impacting this number, which isn't showing the true rate. And, it's funny because I listened to this horse shit that comes out of the White House, and it wouldn't matter if Trump had these numbers, he'd be saying it. If Biden has these numbers, he's saying it. What scares the crap out of me is they keep with this rhetoric of like, I don't know why people aren't happy. Gas has been going down. It's like,
we give you what you want.
Yeah,
it's still $4.
It's doubled and went down a tiny bit, and we're like, I told you we were going to make it work for you guys. Yeah. It's like, what? Like that's like that,
the gas station owners.
Well, that's like your buddy wants to buy a $700. Your buddy wants to rent a $700 apartment. The closest thing he can find is 14, and they're like, good news, $13.90 for you.
Yeah. Just for you.
Sorry, we saved you $10, which is a shitty.
You're welcome, is what you mean to say. And that's the thing that sucks is it's insane. I just, Drew, again, because I think the inflation piece is so obviously outrageous, it's hard to even have a deep conversation on it.
Yeah.
I agree that, I mean, look, 0.75 is locked in. That's a guarantee, I think. Whether we get to the 1 or not, I'm hearing it's like a 1 in 2 odds right now. My thesis on this is it's going to be bad, but you got to just do it. I mean, you got to put the full point on there and just say, because this cannot continue. Let's call it what it is. This cannot continue.
But then wouldn't you make the argument that if this shouldn't continue or can't continue, wouldn't you say we need to hike like freaking like 2.5%, if anything?
I don't think they can, because then the problem is now that affects the
debt repayment, right?
Well, yes, that's the big macro. But like, even if you think about what that's going to do to mortgage rates overnight. It's not enough time to adjust. House prices would have to come down by.
But like for something like real estate, Sean, like how would you even adjust? It's not exactly liquid to a point where you can be like, oh, I'm just going to quickly short it or sell it or whatever, right?
Like you have to. But you're talking about the real estate. I'm talking about the attached like rates.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like if you're trying to buy a house right now and they jump up by 2 points,
right,
your mortgage is now 9%. And that means in order to sell houses have to come down by 20, 30, 40%. And that can't happen that quickly. Right.
No one's going to try to sell it at those prices. They're just going to wait.
That's the other thing too, which is probably a good segue. Drew, you wanted to talk about some real estate stuff, man. So that's a good segue over what you're thinking.
Yeah, it's something I saw on Facebook by one of my, I guess it's one of my mortgage brokers is saying supply is going up, but people are still buying. So people are listing their houses, and I think year over year, I think it's like 17% growth. We have more inventory on the market. So maybe that is a sign of slowing down, but people are still buying. I know there's houses on my street being built, and the thing that worries me a little bit is that the house next to me has been bought. The house across the street a little bit of ways has been bought, but none of the other houses, I think there's like 4 or 5 houses that are being built, have not been contracted yet.
Okay.
So I think there's going to be a lagging stop. I think it's going to be a sudden drop of buying.
It's tough because, like, when you think about to your point about the indicators being lagging, it's not just a question of, like, think about all the metrics that you could measure: interest rates, new home sales, previously owned home sales, the average price deductions, number of offers, days on market. I mean,
Right.
all those
Rates,
things
too.
take a long time to catch up to today. So it's
Yeah.
like, to your point, the house next to me sold before it even hit the market. They had a family come in, look at it the day before it was going to go, and they offered full price. Down the street
That's what
from
we
me.
did for our house. Our other house that we just sold it before it even hit the market.
When did you
for
sell? I
cash.
forget. It was pretty recent, right?
It was I think it was in April.
Well, yeah,
So
that's
okay.
I think we
Okay,
put it on the market. Well, we put it on the market in March and said we're going to sell it, and then my realtor's friend, through my boss, was like, "Oh yeah, we got a buyer." Offered 100% cash, and then more than what we were asking.
Wow.
I'll tell you
So
one
we were
thing.
like, done.
If
I got
I'm a
mine
real
over
estate
asking.
agent- If I'm a real estate agent, I hope you've been saving your money,
Yep.
because this is of all the things that are out there, that's the boom and the bust where you're going to see it the most. Where every time prices go up and things start getting better, 1,000 people per capita. I'm just making up a number. Tons of people jump in and want to, like, suddenly sell houses because they're like, oh, $1 million at 3%, I'm going to make 30 grand.
Yep.
Or
Yep.
you know, and I know they don't make that much per house, but, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, the prices go up and all of a sudden everyone wants to go for it. The one thing, though, that I will say, I talk about this almost every time we talk, is the high-end, ultra-expensive cars. I keep seeing more and more and more. And before we actually went live, you know, we were all just talking about this, that, like, we're looking at, like, financing options on supercars that, like, granted, it's insane, but
Yeah.
that said, it is in theory affordable. Like, if you
Yeah,
make
yeah.
45, 50K a year with overtime and maybe you have a side hustle, you can technically go and buy a Lambo, finance it out for years, and
Write
get
it
it
off.
for $2,500 a month. You know, you can live in your parents' basement and have a Lambo in your yard.
Write it off.
Get a Countach.
Yeah. No, that's true. I know over here, whenever I see these Porsches, and this is a Porsche town, these guys pull equity. Like, there's a, so I'm in the GTA called Greater Toronto area. It's like literally red hot. Like, the real estate market freaking always goes up for the most part. But over here, it's like, I'll give you an example. The place I moved out of, which is closer to Toronto, just the condo, which is a small condo that I moved out of, went up in value by 200 grand in a span of like 3 years. So these guys, all they do is they pull equity and they go buy their Porsches. But then the TikTokers and all those guys, you know, they basically just finance it. But I don't know how to do it, man. Up here, it's way too expensive.
You know what? You know what's really scary? It's actually scary and makes it really tough. Is money is very fickle when you don't have a real way of making it, right? I don't mean that to sound even super silly, but, like, the problem is, much like our conversation about people don't understand what's happening in politics or the economy or whatever because they get little sound bites. This is the same problem I think we see with social as well, where, like, you can see it happen all the time where someone gets a little virality in their life, they suddenly get a bunch of views and new followers. And
The Island Boys.
Perfect, dude.
We gotta do that, guys. Gonna tattoo up.
Go on, bro.
Yeah, like, let's get across the top, guys. You look great on me. Like, that's a perfect example of, like, you do that for 6 months, 1 year, you make yourself some serious money. You sell out all the way, but then you bank it. You bank it, good investments, safe returns. You can live off your returns forever. But the problem is, and I think we're not the ideal group for going buck wild, but, like, maybe a little younger than us. Like, I totally get it. If I'm 20-year-old Sean and I've got 500,000 followers who want to hear me talk about finance, even though I probably don't do anything in finance, and like, in order for me to get to $1 million, I have to have a Lambo and I need a penthouse, because then people aren't going to believe it. Now I have to have nice fancy suits.
Yeah.
And what's so funny is, Chris Patel was just saying on Twitter earlier, like, in Darton's, a Christian was saying about that TikTok is, like, super viral, and I was coming over the top saying, like, I see that too, but, like, if you track it back, like, Facebook, when it first came out, you could post anything and get 1,000 likes.
Yeah.
Then it was Insta, then Twitter, then Snap, whatever. Now it's TikTok. So the key is not only do you have to keep coming up with new and constant content, you also have to keep changing your platform, but keep up with the other platforms too.
Yeah.
And you have to make sure that none of them change their rules on monetization. You have to make sure YouTube keeps paying you. And this is why, this is why the three of us are lucky. We only have 8 people that ever watch this show. So we don't have to worry about getting paid. It's great.
I got 100 people that watch me.
But yeah, man, I don't know. I think that these shakeouts are super necessary. And you know what? I'll give this a preface before I say it. I got really interested in the idea of I'm going to give it the internet name, the FIRE movement. But I was,
okay, yeah.
I've been looking at the idea of an early and independent retirement for a very long time, and I'm pretty much there. And maybe a couple more years, I'll really, really act on it. But the biggest challenge with these kinds of things is during bull runs, that's when everybody wants to retire early and be independent. And then during bear runs, everything's a scam. It's manipulated. It's
Bitcoin's a scam.
Buy my course.
Well, dude, bottom line is if everything is manipulated in a scam, but everybody knows it, is it a scam that's being manipulated? Or is that just called reality?
I don't know, man. No. But the whole FIRE movement. I remember there's that Millennial Money or whatever, the series, right, on YouTube.
I don't know. So I'm gonna be honest. I'm gonna say this real quick. I don't watch YouTube other than kind of what I do on YouTube. So I hear you said the All In podcast. I invested in one of Calacanas's private companies, so I only know him because of that. And I know that he does a YouTube show. I've never watched it. And then even Millennial Money, I don't know who they are, but I only know it because
it's from CNBC. But it's funny because it's so funny because they show these people that are FIRE movement people, and one group of a couple or whatever, they're out in Phoenix or something or somewhere in Arizona, and they're we are living off of $400,000. I'm you guys are so fucked. There's no way you're gonna be living for very long after 400,000. How the hell would you see me? I get it. 400 grand would have been a lot of money 10 years ago for me, right? But it's that's nowhere close enough to retire. So for me, it's and I read it. I go on Reddit. They're I retired on 350 grand. I'm Dad, if you move just a little bit out of the country, you're so screwed. You have to have a certain metric, and especially with this 9.1% inflation, that shit's just gonna go right to the dirt.
When I was 18, I could have lived in an 84 Buick Regal parked in the shopping mall. So it's stop it. You can't retire when you haven't worked yet. I don't care who hears that, who doesn't like it. There's no such. You cannot retire from nothing.
Get some STD point, man.
Just give up on life. I'm done.
Well, you haven't even experienced what it is yet. You don't even know what you're retiring from. But this speaks to my point of localization. If you grow up in an area where all your friends have shitty jobs and you have a shitty job and you work at a retail store or a job you don't like, and your parents are breaking your chops, it's I'm done. I'm going to be financially independent. It's no, man. Financially independent is not I only need $500 a month to live because I live in my parents' house or I sleep in a van. Stop it right now. That is, or even I love the whole tiny house thing. Let me tell you something. You know how many tiny houses are in my area sitting in the back of a $2 million home's yard? And
Sean, your tiny house is your house. You're too big, bro.
Fair point. But all these, I hear all the time, they're I'm living independently. I'm oh, you're living independently at the end of your parents' driveway? Where you go in to use their bathroom and their food. Stop it. Just stop.
They have 2 kids and a dog.
Yeah.
In the parents'
house. No bedroom.
You can't. Oh my God. Our old house was 900 square feet, and even that was getting cramped. Especially when you start adding dogs. It was 900 square feet.
Yeah.
And then now the house we have is double that. It's 22, 23. So it's a big upgrade. But it's so much more wiggle room. It's you can breathe.
Well, Drew, that's good. You're going to hit it big on YouTube.
Yeah, I'm just going to start promoting STD Coin.
I love it.
Then to go study at the library,
Shibba ding dong kangaroo, it's coming for you, man. No joke.
Start playing calls on it.
God almighty. But it just it is what it is. And I think this was sort of a good one today, I thought, because it's so funny to see how both the spectrum of the people who seem to think they know the most about everything are in the tightest circles, because when your circle's really tight, it's easy to know about everything.
Yeah.
The bigger your scale is and the larger that sphere grows, the harder it is to be an expert in everything. And what I find is the people who seem to know the most always say they know the least. and like that's a sign I noticed.
I know it's true. You were talking about cars too, and it's funny because I think the top two cars for like high net worth individuals is like a Ford F-150 and a Toyota Camry, right? It's like, I mean, I'm sure they have their G wagons, but yeah. I don't know, man.
I gotta get back to work, boys. What about you guys?
I'm gonna get back to work too.
Yeah, man. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks whoever's watching. Thanks for joining us, guys. I think we'll sign off here. You guys have a good Friday, good weekend. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Have a good weekend, everybody.
You guys.
See ya.